the river, and his body wasn't recovered.
The icy Bralo River, whose waters rise from the snout of the great Baltoro glacier, which sweeps down from K2. The birch twig bridge has long been swept away, and the British expedition must painstakingly negotiate the crossing under the eyes of their frightened porters. Joe Tasker.
We knew the rope bridge was very old. We'd heard about it from other expeditions, and we'd read about it from the descriptions of the early pioneers. Even seen some film of it made by Charlie Houston on his expedition. Of course, we were never to get to see the bridge because it had been cut down. All we could see was some tattered remains on either bank. The river was extremely fast-flowing and very deep at this point, and if anybody should fall in, there was no way that they could be rescued. The porters were all really excited about going across, and we had to fasten them into a seat harness so that they wouldn't come to grief if they panicked in the middle. And we had to do everything for them, fasten them on, and then actually push them off the ledge. As they left the ledge, they let out a scream, Inshallah, which means God help me, because they knew that if they did fall into the river, or if any of us fell into the river, there was no way we could be rescued.
Safely across the Bralo River, the British expedition sets off once more. On the 29th of May 1978, they set foot on the 20-mile-long Baltoro glacier which leads to K2. It is an area of strange and compelling beauty.
Concordia is the most incredible place. It's the meeting of the Godwin-Austen glacier, which comes down from K2, and the Gasherbrum glacier, which sweeps below Gasherbrum Fall across towards Baltoro Kangri and Chogaliza. Magnificent, massive snow peaks. Then you come over a slight rise, and suddenly K2 is before you, and it's the most incredible, magnificent sight I think that I've ever seen. We reached the Japanese base camp just below K2 on the 30th of May. This wasn't actually going to be our permanent base camp, which was up on the Savoia Glacier, but this was as far as our porters were prepared to carry without being specially equipped.
You've been paying out a few bob today, Mr. Estcourt.
And on that payday, we paid out well over £10,000 to the porters. They were actually paid about £5 a day. I think even so, though, the porters were very glad to leave us. They'd got fairly cold those last few days, and they left very, very thankfully.
Bonington chooses 25 special high-altitude porters, and their expedition, now totaling 33 members, moves up the Savoia Glacier to their advanced base camp.
Going up the side of the Savoia Glacier, a great tottering mass of granite rubble, and then up a kind of rubble chute close to the side, below a couple of rather frightening serac walls with avalanche debris on them.
Doug Scott.
Death Alley was where the glacier rubs against the side of Angel Peak and it gets very disturbed and broken up. And there's a lot of seracs hanging about, and you walk under sort of 50, 60 foot high pinnacles of ice which You walk by next day, you found they've all collapsed in the night, and of course you just have to go as fast as you can over that section, just hoping that it doesn't collapse when you're passing.
Bonington's team are now right on schedule. Above base camp towers 9,000 feet of the sheer west ridge of K2, the world's second highest mountain. If they are to follow their chosen route successfully, they must now strike boldly for the summit and pray the weather holds fair.
You please take out, bring that paper.
By the 3rd of June, we'd actually got base camp firmly established. The next vital thing was to decide which way to approach the West Ridge, and I therefore sent 2 recce parties out to either side of the bottom of the ridge to decide upon the best way of approach.
It is a time for decisions. Bonington sent his most experienced companions, Doug Scott and Joe Tasker, to reconnoitre to the right of the west ridge of K2. Pushing up to the left were Nick Estcourt and Peter Boardman, making for the Savoia Pass and the Chinese border. Several hours later, exhausted by their exertions, both groups report back to their impatient comrades.
It probably was. The cold and the wind hit the corner.
Was it bitter? Had you got anoraks with you?
No, we left it all behind us.
Oh, gosh.
I said he passed out with cold.
Anyway, what did it all look like?
Well, you could just see a glacier going down into the desert. I spent about 3 seconds looking at the view.
Oh, well, you nearly got as
High as the
high as the Americans in one push.
How'd you get on, Joe?
Oh, great. There's, it seems like we can get a bivouac, a camp, underneath that rognon with the snow on top of it, right on the crest of the ridge. We went about halfway, probably, to it.
Where, to the left of the ice, that hanging ice ball?
Well, it's above that, actually. It's very deceptive, all this place, because that ice, that Serac area is actually
Long way
much
back.
further.
So Bonington made up his mind.
We decided on the southern approach to the West Ridge, and on the 5th of June, Doug Scott, Joe Tasker and Pete Boardman actually moved up to Camp 1 to start pushing the route out towards what we hoped to be Camp 2. Camp 1 was around about 19,000 feet above sea level. I stayed just one more day down below to get everything sorted up before going up to join them. And I must say, at this stage, everything seemed really good. The whole team was now gelling together. We were immensely optimistic and really glad to be getting our teeth into it. But even so, I think we all realized just how serious and how big a problem it was.
The rest of us are moving up to Camp 1 today. Nick, Pete Boardman, Joe Tasker and myself. And tomorrow we're hoping to push the route out from Camp 1 right up across the pear butters, as we call them, over the top of those, and getting onto some snowfields. And there's some very steep rock where we've got to traverse across some terraces to get onto those big snowfields there lit up in the sun. And we'll probably stay up there now for about 10 days, 2 weeks, pushing out the route, and might even get right up as far as Camp 4, Camp 5. Then we're all going to come down for a rest, and then go up and hopefully go for the top. But anything can stop this, of course, if we have bad weather. In 1975, the Americans, for instance, had 17-day storms, which is certainly going to upset any program we might optimistically devise down at base camp.
Peter Boardman.
The fear that we had on K2 was of snow, untrodden snow. You've no history of pattern of avalanches to learn from. And so as soon as we started at the West Ridge, we were looking for the safest looking route.
June the 12th, Nick Estcourt and Porter Kamajan set off optimistically across the snow slope to Camp 2 with Doug Scott.
Well, I was just looking forward to getting to Camp 2, 30 feet to go. I was having a last rest, gasping away for air, and suddenly there was a tremor went through the snow underneath me, and almost straight after there was another one, and by this time the adrenaline was surging through my body, and I realised that there was going to be something nasty happening. And I dived onto my eyesight, pressed it into the snow as a kind of belay, and I looked back across my tracks and realised that the whole of the snow slope was sliding off.
Bonington saw the same avalanche from 1,500 feet below.
It was about, 11 o'clock in the morning, I suppose. Jim Duff and I were actually digging out a platform to put another tent up. And suddenly, about 200, 250 feet to our right, this huge powder snow avalanche came pouring down over the ice cliffs. And I just instinctively dived into the tent, grabbed my camera, and got off about 3 shots. And then, just as I was taking some more, Jim said, "For Christ's sake, Chris, what the hell do you think you're doing? The lads might be in that." And I just hadn't thought this was possible, I suppose because I'd chosen the route going across the snow slope about 1,500 feet above, and I thought it was absolutely safe. And I tried to reassure Jim and told him that I thought that this was an avalanche that must have broken away quite a bit below where the line of our route went.
Peter Boardman was above Camp 2.
The whole slope just began to move. It was absolutely enormous. It was so big that I couldn't believe it. It was like watching a film. And the figure in the middle was just completely overwhelmed by this avalanche. He moved down with the slope. The slope seemed to be moving down with him. And then he just disappeared.
Suddenly, I found myself catapulted right out of my stance. Ice axe just ripped out the snow, and I was cartwheeling and sliding uncontrollably down the slope towards the avalanche. I just remember entirely relaxing into that slide, being not afraid, but very curious as to what it was going to be like in that avalanche, and in fact, I suppose, what it would be like to die. Well, as this all happened in a split second, but suddenly I found myself stopped dead in the snow. I'd gone right over it on a complete somersault, and with 65 pounds on my back, I'd made like a giant anchor in the snow. And with that stop, the rope snapped, and I found myself right on the edge of the avalanche. I rubbed myself down, looked round for Nick, but he'd gone down some 5,000 foot of ice cliff and steep rock, yelling and yelling his name, but nothing to do but just to go up to Camp 2. And then Pete and Joe came down the ropes, and we sat there, a very tearful trio, and finally got the radio out and radio down, and Chris was on open call, and we explained what had happened.
And then Doug's voice came out. And Doug, his voice was breaking, he was obviously in tears, and said that Nick had been caught in an avalanche, and in fact had been in that avalanche that had come pouring down.
After Nick Estcourt's tragic death, the climbers felt they must turn back. Accordingly, on June the 13th, they evacuated K2. The savage mountain had claimed one more life.